All right. Do you got any questions for me?
Yes, I do.
What's up?
The teacher went over more of the machine code, and I saw something about like she said there was a little bit of it's finicky when I think when it comes to B types.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So, have you looked at the encoding yet for the B type?
Yes, I'm looking at it right now from Appendix B, and I see immediate 12, and then we get immediate 10 through 5,
Yep.
and then at byte bits 11 through 7, that's immediate 4 through 1 and 11.
Yeah. So, can you guess as to why she says it's funky?
I can see that it's funky just because like where the immediates are, that they're just spaced out. I believe it's because it's easier for the hardware.
Yeah. Exactly. So the way that that RISC-V encodes its different instructions is it tries to keep as many bits that are common across all the encodings in the exact same bit position. So, as a simple example, in every single instruction type, the bottom 7 bits are always, always, always the opcode. And every single instruction which uses a destination register, the destination register is always between bits 11 and 7. Same deal for the RS1 register. Every single instruction that has a source register 1 has that located between bits 19 and 15. And so it's the same deal for the bits for the immediate. Basically, it's trying to keep as many of the immediate bits in the exact same position as possible. So, for example, um, let's see if we can look at one. Yeah, so for example, on the I type and the S type, you'll notice that the immediate bit 11 is always the leftmost bit. Now, why do you think that 11 is not in the leftmost spot for the B type, if you had to guess?
Um, well, I could see that it's the next most significant bit, or like one before the most significant bit. So, um, does it have something to do where the op code where it's 6 bytes and then it would grab that one immediate byte?
Well, I guess I'll put it like this. Compare S type and B type and tell me what you see that's different.
Um, I guess the biggest difference here with S type and B type is that the immediate 11 is in 31 through 25 for S type, while in B type it's in 11 through 7.
Yeah, so one really important thing to note here is actually that the bit fields, like the number of bits between both of them, are actually different. So you'll notice that in the S type, you have 11 to 5 and then 4 to 0. So that goes from 11 to 0. But in B type, you actually have everywhere from 12 down to 1 instead of 11 to 0. So I'm not sure if you noticed that, but you have an extra 12th bit and you don't have the 0th bit anymore. Because of that, in the encoding, you have to swap around the bits in order to, I guess, have it be consistent.
I see. And this consistency is for the hardware.
Yes, for the hardware, to make it easier on
Okay.
the hardware. Though it does make it harder for us to decode
Mm-hmm.
the instructions. Okay. Yeah, did you have any other questions in regards to that?
Um, I suppose no, just because like at the very least, if I can check my answer with Venus for
Yep.
now, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So and it seems like the questions are just like pretty easy. Are pretty easy just because you're able to put them all into Venus.
Yep.
I will say though that for exercise 3, does it so we're so the instruction addresses they're just the same, right? They're just the same as like the one to the one that we will transform into machine code.
What do you mean?
Oh, like in 0x000a00, like that branch equal t4 to 0 and loop, that's just going to, that machine code is just going to stay in that same address, right? There's no change in that.
Yes, it's the machine code derived from the branch equal
Mm-hmm.
instruction is going to be located at that address, yes.
Okay. And then, so for exercise 3, like, is it just um, is it just trying to say that we need to turn branch equal into machine code, and then we go to the loop, or
So
um,
the label loop is not machine code. It's
mhm.
just a label for us to see. It actually has no correspondence in terms of like encoding. What it is used for is you'll notice that the way that the branch statement works is that you go from branch to jumping either to loop or to whatever the next address is, right? So it'd
Mhm.
either go to hex A00C or it'd go to hex A004 if it does not branch. And basically, the point of this is to see how your immediate is encoded. So you'll notice that in the branch, in the type that has branches, you have an immediate encoding, and that immediate encoding is used to store how you're jumping and to where you're jumping. But it's not storing the address of where you're jumping to, it's storing what's called a relative address. So we know that our current instruction for the branch is at A000. And then the address we're trying to jump to is at A00C. And so the way you encode that in an immediate value is you take the difference of those two, i.e., how far are you jumping from where you're at currently. If you're jumping forward in the code or downwards in the code, it's a positive jump. And if you're going backwards, it's a negative jump. So for example here, it's a jump of 12, or C. But I will say that in the immediate encodings, I believe that you don't base the jump starting point off of where the branch statement is, but rather the instruction right after it. And that's because if the branch is not executed, that's the instruction you'd be going to, so you base it off of there. So instead of being A00C minus A000, it's going to be A00C minus A004, in which case you're going to get 8, and that'll be your immediate. And so that's how you would basically calculate your immediate for that branch and for all your branches that you're going to have. And this is just for branches. For jumps, it's different. Did I answer your question? I feel like I might have forgotten what it was. Or are you good?
Sorry. I was saying, so we're going to transform that branch equal t4 0 into machine code, and then the immediate is going to be 12 minus 4, which in this case is 8.
Yep.
Okay. And but if they aren't equal, so then we just go down like just 4 more.
That's correct, yeah, but
Okay.
you don't have to worry about that when you're translating it to machine code.
Oh, I see. I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, you did answer my question. Thank you very much.
Yep. Did you have any questions, AJ? Or are you just hanging around? Oh, your mic might not be reading. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, you can just text it in the what's it called, in the chat, in the voice. What's it called, in the voice channel. In here. Oh, just so you know, when you are typing the branch statements into Venus, it actually doesn't matter where you are currently because the encoding is relative to where you're at. So it doesn't have to be at A000, A00C. It could be at B000 and B00C because the relative distance between those 2 points is still the same. It's still 12 or 8 if you take away the 4. So when you're coding on Venus, you can just put 3 instructions and have it be exactly like that. And even though it's not at the exact same addresses, the relative distance between the two is still the same. So you can, either way, it's going to be the same encoding.
I see. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so AJ, you said problem 3 about the branches and stuff. What about the branches did you have a question on? Subtract by how many lines of instruction? Oh, yeah. Well, I'll let you finish typing before I answer. Yeah, it's needed for all branches. So I was explaining this a little bit earlier, I think before you came in, but basically the way that the label is encoded into your branch statement is as follows. So you'll notice that when you have a branch, you have the location of your current instruction. So it's the branch instruction. And this is at some address A. And then you have your label, which is at some other address. So I'll call it A plus some offset. I don't know what that offset is, but I'll just call it offset. So this is your branch instruction, like that first one, BNE or BEQ. And then this is your label, like in that first one, which is called loop. And essentially, the way that the label position is encoded is relative to where your branch statement is. So, for example, this branch statement is at address A, and in that first example, it's hex 0A000. So that's your address. Let me just double check. Yeah. Now, for this label, the label is positioned a little bit below the branch statement at this address. And so the way you encode that in the RISC-V encoding is you figure out the distance between these two, how far it is to go from your branch to your label. So you subtract them. You do the label minus the branch position. So you take the address of the label and subtract it with the address of the branch. And so in this case, you're going to get this minus that. So when you subtract them, everything cancels out except C minus 0. So the immediate is going to be, I'm going to write hex C, but it's not quite hex C. So I mentioned it's the distance between from here to here. That's not entirely true. It's actually the distance from the instruction right after the branch to the label. So the instruction right after the branch is hex 4 zeros A and then 4 at the end. So it's always the difference between the two minus 4. And so in that case, you're going to get hex 8. And so remember that the point of this 8, oh yeah, let me take a look at your message. So it's label minus the instruction line under the branch. Yeah, yep. So when you take that difference, you're going to get a number. And that number, essentially, is a relative position between where the branch statement is and where the label is. And that's how you encode where to jump to. Or where to branch to, pardon. And so this is what gets encoded in your immediate field for the B type. So for C, you'll notice that it is a label which is behind, right? So it's the same deal. You're still subtracting. You're just going to get a negative number because let me check. Yeah, you're going to get a negative number because the label position is actually above the branch in terms of the code. So in that example, you have the branch is located, let me write that here. Let me just write it up. So you have BLT, and this is located at address D. And then you have the label way above it at C10C. So you do the same thing I mentioned before. You take a look at the address right after the branch, which is hex 0000D004, and you measure it with respect to that. So now you take the label value, the label address, and you subtract the branch location address. So you do this minus the second, and this is a D here. And so you're going to get a negative number for that. But it's the same exact principle. It's always negative when you're jumping backwards or branching backwards, and it's always positive when you're branching forwards. And these numbers that we calculate are just going to end up in hex. Yeah, so when you encode them, technically they're encoded in binary, but shorthand we do hex, yeah. So like, for example, in the previous one, we got hex 8. And while that's true, if we were trying to encode that as a 12-bit binary number, we would have to write, firstly, hex 008 to represent the fact that it's 12 bits. And secondly, we would have to write it out in binary. So 4 zeros, 4 zeros, and then this. And so this is the immediate 8. Yeah, it's all in binary. We just use hex as shorthand to make it easier to write out. Because no one wants to write this every time when you can just write hex 8. Makes it a lot easier. Yeah, you're welcome, AJ. Did you have any questions for me, Good Noodle?
No, after your explanation, it makes sense.
Alright. Yeah, it's pretty much that same thing for all the branches. And you guys are going to talk about later how to do jump. Wait, have you done jumps yet? No, right? Like, in terms of encoding?
I think we went over jump and link.
Today?
Yes.
Okay. It's not too bad. It's not a relative address, it's an absolute address. Kinda. Where's this? Any other questions for me?
When you said that we don't have to worry about like if it doesn't hit it, is it because like if it doesn't if it's not true, then it's just gonna skip that line and just go down to the other?
Yeah, because the way that it happens in hardware, you're going to talk about this, I imagine, a little bit at the end of like the semester, but basically the way that it happens is you, in your processor, have to calculate every time you do a loop through your code, every time you run an instruction, you have to calculate what the next address is going to be. And when I say the next address, I mean the next instruction address. Typically, for most instructions, it's going to be whatever you were at before plus 4. It's just the next address in your instruction memory. However, depending on the instruction, that's not always true. So instead of having... So here's what it would look like in hardware, kind of, a little piece of it. This is your PC register. It's a 32-bit register, and the PC stands for Program Counter. because it's a counter which corresponds to which instruction you're at in your program. And so typically, what we imagine happens, and what does happen most of the time, is the following. Just like you guys have talked about in class with respect to counters, this is indeed a counter, and it's taking whatever its old address was, the previous instruction. You're going to add the number 4 to it, and that's going to be your new next instruction. However, we don't always want to just go to the next instruction. Sometimes we want to branch or jump. And so actually what you're going to have here is not just a 4, but possibly a multiplexer. And so it'll look a little something like this, where you have the option to just do whatever PC was. So I'm going to call this PC 31 to 0. So you can just take PC plus 4 if you're not going to do a jump. But if you are going to do a jump, you can instead add that offset which we calculated earlier. And it's a little bit different. That would be branch, not jump, sorry. And because of that, because of the way that we're encoding it, this is how you would account for branches. It's a little bit incorrect because, like I mentioned before, you don't do it based off of PC. You do it based off of PC plus 4. So you would probably leave this always as 4 and then put a multiplexer up here with another adder. But we'll just leave that be for now. What else was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So about the branching. So you were asking if, you're encoding it. In the encoding, it doesn't matter whether or not it's going to actually take the branch or not going to take the branch. Because the way that it's working is you have a control unit, which not always, but sometimes is an FSM. And that control unit sends these signals which control your multiplexers and things like that. And the control unit basically reads in your instruction and is going to determine whether or not you're going to do a branch. And so if you do a branch, it's going to tell you, hey, I'm going to branch. Put this as a 1, go to my branch. If the instruction turns out as not branching, then it's going to force it, okay, I'm not going to branch and I'm just going to take the PC plus 4. So it doesn't matter in terms of your encoding, you just have to say where you would jump to, because otherwise, if you're not going to branch, the control unit knows to take you to PC plus 4, and it's going to set the multiplexer to select PC plus 4 instead of PC plus your branch offset. I know I went through that a little quickly, and I'm drawing some stuff up you haven't seen yet, but any questions on that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it makes sense. Like, just with deciding that if we should branch or not, and we just use a multiplexer for that.
Yep. Any other questions for me?
No, I don't think I have any more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Sounds good, AJ. Nah, I'm gonna be here until 6:30. That's garbage. I am gonna erase this though.
Have a good rest of your day, Victor.
You too, Good Noodle.
Thank you.
See ya. You have a good one.